Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Stu Hoffman and Eric Hoffman here from ChiroSecure Malpractice Insurance. And we're here to talk about certain topics of interest to you today. And Eric, do you want to share a little bit about our first topic and a little bit about what we do?
Yeah, thank you. We're here to teach this class today. And what we're going to focus on primarily is HIPAA and HIPAA compliance, how to be proactive with your approach, what techniques to use, what things to be aware of. And just to give you a little bit of a background on Dr. Hoffman and myself, we run ChiroSecure. It's a malpractice insurance company. And we spend our days talking to chiropractors about risk management and about certain issues they may or may not have so that they can avoid something further coming of it. And so, again, today we're going to focus specifically on HIPAA and what best practices you can implement for yourselves once you're ready to start into practice. So we'll take it away.
And once we complete that, we'll go into some other topics such as informed consent, maybe a little bit of other things as they come up for us too.
We might touch on some social media stuff because that could also relate to HIPAA with regards to some of the reviews that people get on Yelp, Google, etc. So we'll get into the thick of it and make sure that you guys are well prepared.
Thank you.
So to begin, let's start with the HIPAA protocol checklist. So what sort of things, Dr. Hoffman, should they be aware of when we're talking about a checklist?
Well, first and foremost, understand what HIPAA is. HIPAA is protected health information, and that involves all contact information from your patients, their social security numbers, and any information about the patient's health situation, their treatment, their prognosis, and their payments as well. Their information includes any imaging and test results too. So what we're talking about when we're dealing with HIPAA is what happens in your office, but in addition to what happens in your office, sometimes what happens outside of your office, because I know, Eric, we've both had phone calls from doctors that call up and say, oh, I had everything on my laptop for my entire office, and my car was broken into and the laptop was stolen. What do I do? So we're going to go through some of this with you, but these are some of the things that we get to deal with.
Exactly. And to go even further, the purpose of HIPAA, the history of it, is to protect the consumer's information. So a patient has a right to their privacy, and a doctor's responsibility is to protect that. So certain things that we're talking about, like all contact info, social security numbers, those are good pieces of information that you should be aware of that relates to HIPAA. And I'll give you another quick anecdote. Oftentimes we get calls from doctors who are trying to market themselves or send out an email blast. And, some of those types of things you can run into issues with. And we'll touch on that a little bit later. But, just for you to start thinking about, these are the topics that, some doctors aren't really thinking about that this relates to HIPAA, but it could, and you could run into an issue with it.
And let's also keep in mind that we don't want to go to an extreme when we're talking about HIPAA, but anything, in my opinion, can be signed away on. So as an example, a lot of you will have or already have an open adjusting area. Well, you're going to be talking in front of other patients about someone's personal information, perhaps. So with situations like that, it's very easy to do two different things. Number one, you can actually take the patient, if they have something private to share with you, into another room at that moment in time and give them the time necessary. The other thing that you can do is, as part of your new patient paperwork, have the patient agree that they're going to be in an open adjusting area at different times while they're in your office, and they may hear or say something that will open up from a privacy issue. So as long as they sign off on understanding and giving permission, you're okay. I don't want to make it that every single thing that you do is going to put you in HIPAA jail.
Yeah, that's a term we've coined here at ChiroSecure.
Yes, just now.
So one of the important things to do when you start into practice, if you're opening your own location, or if you're working for somebody else, this is something you should ask for or be aware that they offer. So something that is important is to designate a HIPAA officer, someone who is in charge of protecting these patients' privacy information. And if you're opening up your own practice, that can be you if you're a solo practitioner just starting off, because as most of us know, we're starting off lean and mean, and oftentimes you're not going to have other employees or office managers to help out with this sort of thing. So that could definitely be you. Otherwise, it could be a CA, a chiropractic assistant, an office manager, another doctor who's an associate. You can format it in whatever way is best, but at the end of the day, there should be somebody documented that is the HIPAA officer in the office to protect and make sure these things are going smoothly.
And that person is going to ultimately need to understand and implement the requirements of your HIPAA policy. But as Eric had said, remember, this is a growing situation. If you're new to practice, everything falls on you. And as you continue to grow, you'll have more and more vulnerability. So you'll need to pay more and more attention with a different person perhaps being in charge of that.
Sure. So some additional things to consider, when you're first starting off, or if you're reformatting your office, going into a new practice, you want to do your own sort of risk assessment and really designate and find out all of the areas in the practice where there is personal health information that's stored that is subject to, being made public. And Dr. Hoffman touched on a few of those scenarios already. For instance, if you have a patient that's wanting to share some private information with you, that's a vulnerability. And you want to make sure that those vulnerabilities are maintained and kept separate from the general public. And again, these are not going to be what we call the HIPAA police coming in, breaking down your door to say, why are you talking to this person about this topic in front of everyone? But it's using your head and saying, hey, this seems like private information. Let's go to, a private area so we can talk about it thoroughly and openly and make sure that you, the patient, are taken care of. That's really the important thing to remember.
And let's take it a step further. One of the calls that I had at the beginning of this week was a doctor that called me up because his office is in a building and the building has a cleaning crew. So his staff leaves all of the patient records that need to be scanned into his system, the way his office works, in a bin. And every single night, the cleaning people leave that bin, leave that bin, leave that bin. This particular time, whether it had been someone new that was cleaning or whatever went wrong, they took all of the patient records and he has nothing to scan in on his patients. So number one, we don't know what they did with those records, or at least we didn't at the beginning of the week know what happened to them. Are they in a garbage can where it's accessible to other people, or were they shredded, or what happened to them? But in addition to that, the doctor also doesn't have that patient information scanned into his system, and he's missing dates of service that he is actually billing on the patients. What do you do when the insurance company comes and says, well, let me see the records on that patient? Well, you're going to have a problem. And that's why HIPAA is one piece of the puzzle. But whenever we talk about any strategy pertaining to an office or to risk management, there's always overlap in there.
So touching on that anecdote specifically, what sort of things did you recommend to this person as an additional measure to make sure this doesn't happen again?
Well, the first thing that I actually asked him, Eric, was before I knew that he leaves this out in the open, I asked if he has locks on his file cabinets. And he said no. Well, this information going forward, because we couldn't go backward, I said, rather than leaving out in the open for anyone, whether it be cleaning people, your staff, or whatever else, should be in a drawer or cabinet of some sort that at the end of the day always gets locked. That was the number one thing as a takeaway from this. If you're going to have a system that you're leaving information out until there's time and staff to get it put into a computer system.
Exactly. And that's obviously the most important thing to remember. But, side note, do your work before the end of the day so that this sort of thing doesn't happen. But I digress.
Before we go on, though, let's talk about another situation, because one of the things that we recommend right here is that you should also have your computer's password protected.
Mm-hmm.
And, we've had calls, and I know you've had some of these along with me, of staff that actually left the office and took a computer or corrupted the computer, things of that nature. Don't have a backup of your patient database in your office. Have it somewhere else, protected and password protected. I also had a husband and wife team. Well, she wasn't a doctor. She was the office manager while he was the chiropractor in the office. And all of a sudden, they get into an uproar, and she decides, or he decides, we're getting divorced. And late that night, the woman comes in and takes out every single computer in the entire office to keep him hostage based on what just went wrong in their own marriage. So as much as these things may sound crazy, they actually have happened. And again, a backup in a location that's totally separate from your office, that is password protected, and know what the password is.